All right, today we are jumping into what is basically an ancient legal detective story. It's a debate from the Talmud about a question that, seems really simple on the surface. But as we'll see, a single hidden clue in the biblical text just flips the whole thing on its head. Let's get into it.
So let's set the scene. In the ancient temple, the idea of a sacrifice was all about perfection. You couldn't just bring any old animal. Your offering had to be perfect, unblemished, the absolute best of your flock. It's this core idea of bringing your very best to something sacred. But what happens when an animal is the opposite of perfect?
And that leads us to the key term for today, a tereifa. Now, this isn't just an animal with a little scratch. A tereifa is an animal with a fatal injury. Something is so critically wrong on the inside, like a punctured lung or a torn organ, that it is guaranteed to die within a year. And because of that fatal flaw, it's totally forbidden for anyone to eat.
Okay, so here's where the puzzle really kicks in. The law is super clear. An animal with just a blemish, an external flaw, like a cataract, is forbidden as a sacrifice. But here's the thing. You are totally allowed to eat that animal. So think about it. If an animal that's perfectly fine to eat is forbidden for the altar, what about a tereifa? An animal so flawed it's forbidden even for you to eat. I mean, the answer seems like a no-brainer, right?
The ancient sages actually have a name for this kind of thinking. It's called an a fortiori inference. It's that classic if, then even more so kind of argument. If you can't text while driving, then you even more so can't watch a movie while driving. If the less flawed animal is forbidden, then the more flawed one should definitely be forbidden.
So the case should be closed. You don't need a special rule for this. Logic just takes care of it. A tereifa is obviously forbidden as a sacrifice. It's an open and shut case. But as you've probably guessed, in the world of deep legal interpretation, it's never quite that simple.
And this is where our simple case gets a huge twist. Because the sages, like the brilliant detectives they were, found a piece of evidence, a clue, hiding in plain sight in the biblical text that suggested their perfect, simple logic might actually have a fatal flaw of its own.
Here it is. The clue is in Leviticus chapter 1, verse 3. The verse kicks off by saying that a burnt offering can be of the herd. Okay, seems simple enough. But the problem isn't what the verse says, it's what the verse right before it already said.
And this is where you see the genius of their detective work. The verse just before this one, verse 2, had already said that offerings can come from the cattle, which of course includes the herd. So why say of the herd again? For the sages, there are no wasted words in the Torah. This repetition, it has to be there for a reason. It must be teaching us something new.
And this gets us right to the heart of the mystery. The sages figured out that this extra phrase, of the herd, is the specific source that tells us a tereifa can't be a sacrifice. But hold on a second. If our a fortiori logic was so solid, why would we need a special verse to tell us that? The very existence of this verse screams that our simple logic is wrong. There's a hole in it somewhere. So now, the investigation really begins. The sages start lining up theories, kind of like suspects in a police lineup, trying to find the one case that proves their simple logic just can't be trusted. What they're looking for is an example of something that is forbidden for us, but is somehow permitted for sacred service.
First up, we've got a theory from a sage named Mar, son of Ravina, and he thinks the key to cracking this whole thing can be found in the laws of the Sabbath.
His logic is pretty straightforward. Ordinary work is forbidden for people on the Sabbath. We all know that. But the work of bringing sacrifices in the temple, that keeps going. So here you go, a perfect example of something forbidden for a regular person that's permitted for the Most High. Maybe the same logic could apply to a tereifa.
But nope. This theory gets shut down pretty fast. The work in the temple on the Sabbath isn't just some random loophole, it's a specific, direct command from the Torah to bring those exact offerings. It's a special case, a positive command overriding a negative one. It's not a general principle we can learn from. So, the search continues.
Okay, next up. Another theory gets thrown out there, this time pointing to the laws of kilayim, the rule against mixing wool and linen together in a single piece of clothing.
And again, the pattern seems to fit perfectly. You and I are forbidden from wearing a wool-linen blend, but the high priest's belt, it was required to be made of exactly that mixture. So again, what's forbidden for man is required for God.
And you can probably guess what happens next. This theory gets shot down for the exact same reason as the last one. This isn't some general principle. The Torah gives an explicit command that the priest's belt has to be made this specific way.
It's another unique instruction, not something that breaks the fundamental logic of our case.
All right, so a few other ideas get thrown around, but they all hit the same wall. The simple logic just seems to hold up. And then, our master detective, a sage named Rav Ashi, steps onto the scene. And he has this brilliant realization that everyone has been looking for the clue in all the wrong places. They're trying to find these exotic examples, when the flaw was right there, in the original comparison itself.
Rav Ashi's approach is just so methodical and brilliant. He says, look, let's forget about Sabbath and forbidden mixtures for a second. Let's go all the way back to the beginning, to our original argument. We compared a blemished animal to a fatally injured animal. But what about the people involved? What about the priests who offer them?
And this is it. This is the aha moment where the whole case just cracks wide open. Rav Ashi uncovers this stunning asymmetry. The law about physical blemishes, it's perfectly parallel. A blemished animal can't be offered, and a blemished priest can't serve. Makes sense. But what about a fatal injury? It's not parallel. A priest who has a fatal internal injury, a tereifa condition, is actually still allowed to perform the temple service. And there it is. That's the flaw in the logic.
So that beautiful, simple a fortiori argument, it was built on a totally faulty foundation. You can't make a direct comparison between a blemish and a fatal injury because the law itself treats them differently when you look at the priest. The whole logical structure just collapses.
But hold on, there's one final challenge to Rav Ashi's theory. Another sage points out that an animal born by C-section is forbidden as a sacrifice, but a priest born by C-section is allowed to serve. This looks like it totally ruins Rav Ashi's argument. But this final objection is actually what pushes Rav Ashi to the ultimate brilliant insight that solves the entire puzzle.
This is the final reveal. Rav Ashi refines his argument and uncovers the real distinction here. Just look at the three cases. A blemished animal? Well, its defect is external, it's obvious. An animal born by C-section? That's not a secret. Its unnatural birth is a known fact. But what about a tereifa? Its fatal flaw could be a tiny internal puncture. It could be completely, totally hidden from view.
And that is the final piece of the puzzle. The reason our simple logic failed from the very beginning and the reason the Torah needed that extra seemingly repetitive verse all comes down to one thing: visibility. For flaws that are obvious or known, yeah, you can rely on standard logical principles. But for a hidden, internal, potentially ambiguous flaw like that of a tereifa, you can't. The law has to be explicit. And that verse, of the herd, is the explicit law that closes the loophole for good.
You know, this incredible logical journey isn't just some ancient academic exercise. It's a masterclass in legal thinking, in demanding precision and refusing to accept the easy, obvious answer. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How often in our own legal systems do we rely on obvious logic that might have its own hidden flaw? It forces us to think about the difference between what's seen and what's unseen, and why sometimes the law has to be spelled out to make sure that real justice is done.